Hello, everyone. I'm Bill Raggio. I'm a senior fellow at Foundation for Defense of Democracies and editor of FDD's Long War Journal. This is Generation Jihad, the podcast that covers all things in what used to be known as the global war on terror, but we now call the Long War. Today is Monday, and my co-host is Joe Trusman. Joe is a senior analyst at FDD's Long War Journal, where he focuses primarily on Palestinian terror groups, Hezbollah, and Joe knows so much about so many other happenings and groups that are operating throughout the Middle East. Joe, happy Monday.
Hey, happy Monday, Bill. Always happy to be here and looking forward to the show.
Yeah, a lot to talk about. As usual, we'll try and focus on the top 4 or 5 things that we think are important. Let's jump right into it. Over the weekend, the Hamas launched an attack into Israel. It's an area where Israel permits aid into Gaza. This happened in southern Gaza. 4 Israeli soldiers were killed. Others were wounded. Joe, tell us what happened in this attack. What are the implications here?
There was an attack over the weekend by Hamas that targeted an area in Kerem Shalom, which is in southern Israel, right near the border with Gaza. A combined rocket and mortar attack and against an Israeli position, a military position, and civilian position. Nevertheless, it resulted in at least 4 dead IDF soldiers. Is significant. Over the last few months, there's been sporadic rocket fire, mortar fire on southern Israel from Gaza, right? And but this one was a little larger. This one was about 10 projectiles, approximately. I attended a conference, a news conference that was set up by the IDF specifically to talk about this attack. And the interesting thing here is that the alerts went out, right, for incoming rocket fire, mortar fire, but the Iron Dome system didn't engage the rocket. So I think if I remember correctly, the IDF or the Air Force is looking into it. Why didn't it activate? So that could have prevented the deaths of soldiers. Who knows? But that was a particularly troubling aspect of what happened. And but then the Israelis they shut down the crossing. All right, the Kerem Shalom crossing, which has been facilitating, which has been used to transfer aid into Gaza. And we've been hearing a lot about that recently, all the aid coming into Gaza. So the Israelis shut it down. So it's been shut down for about a day now. But this morning, it seems that after talking with Prime Minister Netanyahu talked with President Biden, it seems that Israel will be reopening the Kerem Shalom crossing. All right. So, but nevertheless, that's what happened. I think right now, and we'll talk about this. We'll definitely talk about this here in a few minutes. I'm observing more rocket fire, mortar fire from Palestinian armed groups towards southern Israel than in previous weeks and months. So, and I think it's building up to this eventual Rafah operation, which we can talk about shortly.
Yeah, Joe, I was talking to our colleague Seth Franzman earlier this morning, and he had made the similar observation about an increase in mortar and rocket attacks, and that he's seeing a trend toward. And look, I suspect this is related to limited military operations in Gaza. It's Hamas keeps calling for a ceasefire, and there is a de facto ceasefire as these negotiations take place. But we'll get into that with the negotiations a little sooner. As far as that is interesting that the launch of the either rocket or mortar was detected, and yet it wasn't intercepted. And there could be a variety of reasons for that. Could be the trajectory, but reliance on technology. It's imperfect, and we saw this. The Israelis' over-reliance on October 7th, contributed to Hamas's successful attack. Next question: the U.S. built a pier, or is building in the process of building the humanitarian pier off the coast of Gaza that was supposed to funnel aid. Hamas, I believe it was Hamas, targeted at that last week. There was a mortar or rocket attack against it. Hamas routinely attacks or hijacks aid trucks. Why is it that Hamas does these things that prohibit the distribution of aid and they're never held accountable for this in the media. All the blame is put on Israel for closing the crossing, for for all of these reasons. I mean, sure we know the answer here, but
Right.
tell us anyway, Joe.
Well, no, I mean, you bring up two very good points, right? So why is Hamas doing this, right? Why would they, hijack humanitarian aid for that is meant for the Palestinian civilians, right? And it's obvious they need it for their fighters. They care more about themselves than they do the Palestinian civilians. If they really cared about Palestinian civilians, there would not have been a war. All right, the October 7th would have never happened. I mean, again, we've said it before countless times. Hamas isn't stupid. Yahya Sinwar, the leader of the group in Gaza, isn't stupid. He knows what he's doing. He understood the ramifications of launching that type of attack against Israel. He knew the Israelis would react severely, and of course they did. And again, he went ahead with it anyway, knowing what would likely what would have happened, right, if Hamas was successful, and they were very, very successful, and the other Palestinian armed organizations that joined in the October 7th attack. So Hamas is selfish. All right, that's what it is. Something I've been observing for years now. Hamas only cares about itself and its own and its rule in Gaza, and it will kill civilians. It will put down other armed groups. All right, which it has before, to ensure its own survival. Right, so that's important. And so why are people blaming Israel? Well, a lot of people, unfortunately, see this war as something the Israelis are dragging on. It's almost like that they're blaming Israel for this war, right? That they've forgotten how this war started, or they say that this war started because of Israeli policies regarding Gaza, which is nonsense. Nevertheless, you get all this. A lot of the blame is on Israel. Israel can be successful in this war, and they'll still be blamed for a lot of things. And of course, we hear this a lot with aid, with the casualties, Palestinian casualties, and all sorts of things, right? So, not a lot of, like you said, a lot of people aren't blaming Hamas. None of this would have happened if Hamas didn't launch October 7th. But that gets lost in all the rhetoric and nonsense you read in the newspapers and online. So that's where we're at right now.
Yeah, Joe, if Hamas cared about Palestinian civilians, they'd have built Gaza up after the Israeli withdrawal from Gaza in 2005. And people forget this, right?
Mm-hmm.
That Israel withdrew from Gaza. It withdrew its forces, and it even uprooted Israeli citizens who lived there. And it would have taken the billions upon billions of dollars that had been given in humanitarian aid that had been given to it, and it would have built a state. And instead, they've refused to accept an Israeli state on its border. They've taken those billions in aid to build terror infrastructure to attack Israel time and time again. This is what is being lost in all of this. Israel has a right to exist, and it has a right to defend itself after October 7th. And it's really unfortunate for the civilians in Gaza, but they only have Hamas to blame. So, Joe, negotiations between Israel and Hamas, they're said to be failing. The last I read that Hamas is refusing to accept what appears to be a pretty generous deal in exchange of what I had read, hundreds of Palestinian prisoners, and these are terrorists in Israeli jails and criminals, in exchange for 33 hostages and a 6 weeks ceasefire. That appears to be falling apart. Hamas just doesn't want to accept this. Again, no one's blaming Hamas for not accepting terms of a ceasefire. Right now, it looks like the Israelis are telling Palestinians that are in eastern Rafah to evacuate, to move to safe zones. Is this much anticipated operation in Rafah about to begin? What's your take?
Right. So, you mentioned a lot there, and it's not everything is very important. I think, at least regarding before I mention about Rafah, regarding the negotiations, the sticking point there's been a lot of little things, but the sticking point between Hamas and Israel is that Hamas wants Israel, at least something in writing, saying that if there's a ceasefire negotiation, if prisoners are exchanged for prisoners rather captives in Gaza are exchanged for terrorists in Israeli jails, that Israel will cease the war. All right, they'll stop. They'll withdraw their troops, and that's it. And Israel is like, well, we're not stopping, right? We've committed ourselves to, we're committed to destroying Hamas or its ability to govern in the Gaza Strip, and that and that remains the goal. So this has been, I think, the biggest obstacle, and this is why these attempts for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas that have been going on for months now, before Ramadan, right? Remember, President Biden was trying to get a
I mean, how long has Ramadan been over? I mean, Jesus,
it's this whole war, it's gotten my days all mixed up. It's been more, at least Ramadan, started like 2 months ago, about.
Yeah, it's been over 4 days.
It's been approximately. Nevertheless, so the point being is that this has been dragging on for a while. So anyway, so Israel won't commit to stopping the war with good reason, because, well, you can't just leave Hamas there, because eventually, maybe 5-10 years down the road, we could see another October 7th happen, and that's absolutely true. And then Hamas obviously wants Israel to withdraw, because then that ensures their survivability in the Gaza Strip, right? Hamas is fighting to survive right now. So that's the sticking point. Now, as far as this, the information now about Rafah, the evacuation of Rafah, again, I mentioned this before, but attended a conference with the IDF spokesperson. They do this sometimes when there's a major issue, something happens, or they set up a Zoom conference with foreign journalists. Anyway, so this was last night, and they were saying that they're starting the evacuation of Eastern Rafah and to these safe zones, and but they can say one thing, right? But the tone of how they say things or how they deliver information can tell you a lot. So to me, from what I got from that conference, is that the IDF is going through this, right? Is trying to evacuate, telling residents of Rafah, to Eastern Rafah, to evacuate to a certain area. But my observation is that it could stop at any time, this evacuation, right? And if there's a ceasefire deal, right? So they were almost hesitant about it, that, hey, we're not starting a military operation just yet, all right? We're not invading Rafah right now, but what we are doing is evacuating. So we're setting this up, right? We're getting the wheels in motion here. And so it can, I mean, they're doing it, but it can stop at any moment, right? If there's a ceasefire deal. Will there be a ceasefire deal? I'm not sure. I don't know. Who's going to blink first, right? Hamas or the Israelis? The Israelis are under a ton of pressure, right? Politically, or from the Biden administration. And Hamas is under pressure militarily, right? Not as much as they could have been, right? If it wasn't for, let's say, certain countries that were pressuring Israel to, get their foot off the gas pedal, which is a mistake. Nevertheless, there's Hamas still under military pressure, so we'll see who blinks first between them. I don't know, but I do think this Rafah operation will absolutely go through if there's no ceasefire deal within the next few weeks, for sure.
Yeah, Hamas wants a permanent cessation of hostilities or of war and a withdrawal view of Israeli forces from Gaza. Whereas Israel, and the talk is about a ceasefire. A ceasefire is a temporary halt in fighting. So I think the Israelis are making a mistake by not communicating this. They should be talking. Hamas is not asking for a ceasefire. There's discussion of ceasefire, but that is not what Hamas is asking for. They're allowing Hamas to frame this in their own terms. Believe me, after following these wars for 20 years, the poor messaging from Western governments and from Israel, none of this shocks me anymore. But Joe, as far as a permanent cessation of hostilities or a permanent ceasefire, I guess, if Hamas got its way, would Israel be returning to its pre-October 7th mentality of just managing this conflict?
I don't even want to think about it, to be quite honest with you. I mean, yeah, I couldn't say probably, but we definitely wouldn't see the same government doing anything. The problem too with the Israelis is, I mentioned before, they had there's pressure from the Biden administration, chiefly from the Biden administration, to negotiate a ceasefire, but there's pressure from Netanyahu's own party, right? Especially from one of its, let's say, very active ministers, which is Ben Gvir, who has said that, who's essentially said that he'll quit the government, right? If Netanyahu agrees to a ceasefire, if Netanyahu doesn't go into Rafah and destroy Hamas. So yeah, Netanyahu's definitely in a tough situation, right? So he's got to do the right thing here. But yeah, so that's where we're at right now. And yeah, if I don't want to know what Gaza will look like if Hamas stays in there. But one thing I am confident of is that it will take Hamas a long time to rebuild if they stay in Gaza, right? If they survive, because Gaza right now, I don't have any issues bringing this up. Is that significant portions of Gaza are destroyed for sure, right? Northern Gaza, central Gaza. So a lot of the military infrastructure has been gone, especially the tunnels. So it's tough.
But Joe, if there's no operation in Rafah, those tunnels will remain.
In the south,
tunnels into Egypt will remain. So yes, I think the Israelis have hurt Hamas and its infrastructure, but they certainly wouldn't fully destroy it.
No, absolutely no. Good point. You bring a good point. Hamas is definitely hurt here, okay, and it's going to take time to rebuild for them for sure. But they're not eliminated. So again, maybe in 5-10 years they'll be back doing the same stuff that they were pre-October 7th. So that's the thing here, right? And we can talk about something I've always thought about too is that I'm not trying to be indifferent to the families of the hostages, but if there's got to be a point where Israel has to say no more taking hostages because you're not getting anything in return. Palestinian armed organizations have been taking hostages for decades. We can talk about Hezbollah and others, but specifically Israelis, because they know it's worked, right? They've gotten Palestinian prisoners out of Israeli jails by kidnapping Israelis. And look what happened October 7th, obviously. So we got to get to a point where the Israelis have to say no more, right? And I mean, I think October 7th would be a good time to do it. But so what I'm concerned is that if Israel gives up here, right, for whatever reason, that we're just going to see more Israelis getting kidnapped, more people, civilians, obviously civilians, but and people that are other nationalities in Israel being kidnapped by Palestinian armed organizations. It's just going to continue this cycle, right? So you just got to stop, right? It's got to be a point where no more. So,
yeah, I couldn't agree with you more on the issue of hostages. It does come off as being insensitive to the families and to the hostages themselves, but there are wider issues here at play that the state, again, like you said, this just incentivizes further hostage taking.
Exactly.
And on the issue of significant areas of Gaza being destroyed, one of the problems, I have no doubt that international organizations will rush back in to rebuild, and not just rebuild, critical infrastructure and housing, but Hamas will return to skimming the concrete and the pipes and all the equipment needed in order for them to rebuild their infrastructure as well. This is why Hamas cannot be allowed, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, other groups cannot be allowed to survive. They will just rebuild. And the Israelis, they think they're in a bind right now. Fight this conflict again in 10 years and see how the world is aligned against them. It's already turning here in the United States. It's a very worrying trend amongst the young population, and even within the Democratic Party. You had 88 congressmen saying they should cut off aid to Israel. That would not have happened that would have been unthinkable 20 years ago. So, this is the trend line that Israel's facing. Joe, I'm going to ask you for a West Bank update, but before we do that, there was a report in Axios over the weekend. It was from two Israeli officials told Axios that the U.S. is withholding a shipment of military aid to Israel. No reason was given. However, we have seen reports of threat of holding up aid or military aid to Israel in the past over these negotiations. Are you hearing anything yourself about this? Is this a concerning development, or is it possible there might be a technical reason for this? And this is a lot of much ado about nothing.
Right. Unfortunately, with this report, details matter, right? didn't get much detail here. Yes, I think a shipment. Okay, well, what does that mean, right? A shipment of what exactly? Of artillery shells? Or what is it? And why was it? Why was it held? Right? Was it because of you know? Was it because of logistics or something else?
Was it military equipment that might have been more needed in Ukraine, in
Ukraine,
Israel, or there
exactly,
could be a ton of reasons for it, a ton of
right.
legitimate reasons. But I'm going to say one thing: we've been seeing
Yeah.
a lot of reports, though, out there. The U.S. might sanction Israeli military units. They have said that they would cut off aid. They would consider cutting off aid or wouldn't confirm it. So there's a lot here to go into. But I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump you there, Joe.
No, you're fine. So, but yeah, you bring up an excellent point. And a shipment. So was it a shipment? Yeah, again. So, but it doesn't seem like it was a change in policy. You can look at it like that. Biden is basically sending Israel or Netanyahu a warning that, hey, if you, especially with Rafah again, if you go into Rafah, we'll stop the aid, the shipment of military equipment or weapons to Israel. So that could be interpreted as a warning. So maybe Biden's placating his base, right? Again, like you said, these Democrats that signed on to this letter, right? Trying to condition aid to Israel. It's pretty crazy, given the fact that Israel is fighting an Islamist organizations rather. It's nevertheless, that's the way I see it. I think it's more of a warning, right? Again, Biden and Netanyahu spoke today, according to several reports. So we'll see what happens in the next few days. I think the Biden administration is carefully watching this Rafah evacuation. I think if I was the Israelis, I'd be putting a lot of effort into this evacuation. Like when I mean a lot of effort, meaning trying to get as much people out as possible, civilians, and then starting the operation, right? Because everyone's watching, the whole world's watching this Rafah operation. And I'm going to say it again, this Rafah operation, even if the Israelis go into it, it's not going to end the war. It's not going to destroy Hamas. It's just one piece of the puzzle here, an important piece, right? So there's still all the stuff underground, under Rafah, on the Egypt-Gaza border to look into, for the Israelis to go into, and in other areas of the Gaza Strip where Hamas and other organizations are continuing to operate. So Rafah is not the end all here. Very good, very big point here to make.
Yeah, it is a piece of the puzzle. I think it's an important piece of the puzzle, but it's certainly one that needs to be followed up. You had mentioned the letter from the Democrats. Where was the letter from the Democrats? I've read that the pier, that humanitarian pier, is going to cost $320 million to build. That's just to build it. It's not maintaining it over time. Where was the letter to Hamas when they shelled the pier that they'd consider cutting off aid if that happens again? Where was the letter to Hamas that if they shell, that area at the border crossing in southern Israel, that forced the Israelis to shut down the crossing?
Yeah.
It's so one-sided and it's so frustrating.
Sure.
Listen, although I may disagree, I certainly don't oppose people's right to be, concerned. Are the Israelis doing everything they can to limit civilian casualties, etc.? Those are legitimate views. And, we should have checks and balances in government, but watching this being so one-sided against Israel I never thought I'd live to see that from the American government, but here we are.
Yeah. It's a mess, Bill. Sorry to interrupt.
It really is. It's a worrisome trend.
And this peer thing, it is not worth the risk of because it's what it is. It just supplements what's already happening. It's not that more aid is getting through, or the pier is able to handle more aid than the crossings that have already been established, right? It's just it's supplementing. It's just helping a little, and I just don't think it's worth it. Obviously, there's the cost that you mentioned the attack on the pier already. I think it was maybe on the port. Nevertheless, because there's a pier and a port, right?
Yes, the port.
So,
exactly.
Right, but still, and then and then on top of that, there was just a few days or last week we put on Long War Journal, published on Long War Journal, another group that's in Hamas's sphere of influence, the Popular Resistance Committees. They warned that they would attack the port, all right, if forces, either U.S. forces or British forces, or any force really from any country were to use that pier or use the pier on the port to transfer aid. So I'll tell you something. And we see this with other armed groups in the Middle East, but the Popular Resistance Committee, they would not have published this warning without the okay from Hamas. All right.
Yes. Great point, Joe.
Yeah. And Hamas, they're battling right now. They're in a PR war too. So they don't want to look like they're not allowing aid to come through. So they're not
or even hindering it.
Right. Exactly. So they're going to get one of the affiliated groups to say stuff like this because again, they can, what it is a warning, right? But this is from Hamas. This is the way I see it. So that these forces start transferring this aid into Gaza, that they'll become targets. So it's just not worth it. That's the end of it. That's the whole point. This period is not worth it. I don't know whose ideas it was, but there's a lot of bad things that can happen and likely will. We've already seen it with a mortar attack. So it's a problem.
Yeah, that pier is probably the most expensive piece of performance art in the history of the U.S. government, at least in the foreign policy sphere. It's a feel-good thing, and I believe that if the U.S. wanted to get aid into Gaza, I think there are far better ways to do it, far more efficient ways to spend that money. But hey, it looks good, and it makes people think that we're doing something. Joe, the simmering pot of the West Bank. We've been waiting. Tomorrow will be 7 months for the Hamas's attack on Israel, on the October 7th attack. It's just, I'm amazed that things haven't gotten worse in the West Bank. I suspect part of this is related to the Palestinian Authority feeling its way around and possibly getting a leg up over on its rival of Hamas, because those two groups don't like each other. When Israel withdrew from Gaza, Palestinian Authority controlled Gaza until Hamas ejected it in both an election and then in violent action. Within a year or two of the Israeli withdrawal. Is that correct, Joe? Yeah. So tell us what's happening. What's your read on the situation in the West Bank? Have there been any significant developments since we spoke last?
Yeah. There's always developments. They're significant. I mean, over the weekend, there was a pretty long counterterrorism raid in one of the northern West Bank cities. I think it was Tulkarm, where 4 Hamas members of Hamas were killed by Israeli counterterrorism forces. This cell was responsible for shooting attacks. I think at least one that killed an Israeli. But the problem is, we're almost looking at the date here. I can't believe it, 3 years into this uptick of violence in the West Bank. And because it started in June 2021, at least that's how I've seen it. That's when I started observing everything.
Yeah, you documented this, Joe.
Yeah. Really got into it.
See the uptick. You mapped it out and everything. It's pretty clear that was the point where things started to get out of control.
Right, and so nevertheless, this problem hasn't stopped. Israelis are managing it. That's what they've been doing. They managed it before October 7th. They're managing it now they're a little stronger or a little more active, I guess you could say, against the Palestinian armed groups post October 7th. The Palestinian Authority, they're doing a little, right, but not enough going after these groups. And this may be a fantasy at this point, but I still stand by. I really think the Palestinian Authority and the Israelis should get together and really just come up with a strategy here. Maybe there is one that we don't know of, but it's not working. It's just not. And so, because these groups continue to flourish, or rather to continue to be active. And the northern West Bank is just a hive of armed groups that are becoming better organized, that there are receiving weapons that are being smuggled into the West Bank, especially by Iran and its allies. And I'm just seeing a lot of what worries me more than anything are the IEDs that I'm seeing in the northern West Bank. Holy moly. They're as small as, pipe bombs, for example. And some of them are pretty large. I just imagine a oversized propane tank and then being buried under a road. All right, those are the type of things that are going off, being detonated against Israeli forces now. So that's my worry there. So the West Bank, again, it's continuing to be a problem. We're seeing some recently some new evidence of attempts to set off car bombs, suicide bombings. This is like second Intifada type of stuff that we saw in the early 2000s. Okay, this is what we're getting to. It's just slow. That's the thing. It's very slow, but it's happening and it's not stopping. So yeah, it wouldn't surprise me that this issue in the West Bank will outlast the Gaza war. I'm almost positive about that, actually.
Does the Palestinian Authority wield any power in the northern part of the West Bank where you're concerned?
Yes, they do. They do. I mean, they have a compound in Jenin, for example, but which comes under fire by Palestinian armed groups. And
yeah, so it's not as I was going to say. I'm getting like a Escape from New York vibe from you. Maybe I'm dating myself with that reference. I definitely am, but where it seems like a free fire zone up in the north.
Yeah, I mean, they do operate in Jenin, but the problem with the Palestinian Authority is that a lot of Palestinians, especially the armed groups, they don't see them as an authority anymore for a lot of reasons. Some of them are legitimate reasons, right? I mean, the PA is corrupt, and there's just so much stuff. So the PA in its form right now is almost is just, I don't want to call them worthless, but it's
another armed group.
Yeah, almost. Yeah, I mean, that's the problem. That's why how Hamas is taking advantage of this, right? Hamas is able to. Hamas looks like a good alternative to Palestinians, right? Because look at the Palestinian Authority; they're not doing anything. So that's the problem here. That's the problem with one of many problems in the West Bank and the Palestinian Authority. And to imagine that the Biden administration thought that the Palestinian Authority would be a viable alternative to govern the Gaza Strip, I just look at it like, you got to be crazy.
Yeah, you can't even govern areas of the West Bank. And you have all of the resources, and the Israelis rely on it. The U.S. government provides aid. I've been to I can't remember which town I was in. I think it was Jericho, but I don't remember. To one of those West Bank police stations, and it wasn't all that awe-inspiring. And if there's groups out there like Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and then just other clans and whatnot, the Palestinian Authority is going to have a really hard time exerting it. If it can't exert it in the West Bank, what chances does it have to do it in Gaza? That's, with who? How? Is it going to import people? Are there anyone in Gaza that almost 20 years after the withdrawal of the Israelis and the defeat of the Palestinian Authority, is there anyone that is eager to rejoin the Palestinian Authority? Do they even know what it is in Gaza?
No, that's a very good point.
All rhetorical questions, Joe.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree. There's some Fatah or supporters and those that want that could say they support the Palestinian Authority, but not nearly as many as I think the PA would like, right? So it would be a tough sell to try to get the PA in there, that's for sure. I don't think they would work out, at least in its current form.
Yeah, there needs to be a lot of work. This is, and believe me, I think nobody more than you knows the problems that exist with the Palestinian Authority. But we certainly would love to give it a chance, right? But
yeah,
what are it comes down to capabilities, and is this a pipe dream, or is this an actual solution? I'd lean towards the former, but I'm sure the Israelis probably more than anyone would love the Palestinian Authority. At least it's something it can somewhat work with, as opposed to Hamas, which is hell bent on the destruction of Israel.
Right.
Joe, so we were chatting before the show, and apparently had a very interesting weekend. Tell us about your experience this weekend.
Yeah.
Where did you go, and what did you see?
Right. So on Thursday, I went to a Palestinian pro-Palestinian protest that's been happening not too far from me at Portland State University. There's been, we know about. We don't talk a lot about domestic issues on Long War Journal, but this touches on Hamas and the war, so it's important. But nevertheless, there's been protests at a lot of campuses across the United States, and at Portland State University, protesters, they did a lot of what we've been seeing. They've been taking over buildings on campus buildings, protesting against the war. Okay, so that's what happened here at Portland State University, and so I went. I stopped by. I was and took a look for myself, and yeah, I saw it. There's a large amount of police. Actually, from what I saw, there were more police than protesters. So, and there wasn't a lot of protesters either. I can't put a real number on it, but nevertheless, they were, I wouldn't say clashing, but they were throwing bottles or water bottles at the police, these protesters. And something I noticed, which still sticks with me, is that a lot of these protesters didn't look like students. All right. Now, what I mean by that is that they were mostly young people, right? But these people that I saw, they looked like the type of young people that I usually see in downtown Portland that aren't students. And it's hard to describe that unless you're in Portland. But I looked and I was like, these people don't look like students at all. And so that was striking to me. But yeah, a lot of what you usually hear, the Free Gaza and a lot of that type of rhetoric that they that you usually hear at these protests. But it's interesting. I saw some of them getting arrested rather, and yeah, it was a very interesting experience. But at the same time, I think to myself, did any of these people know anything about Gaza or Hamas before October 7th? Or are they just getting everything from God knows where? So so I went to one of these protests, hung out for a while. Very interesting, but I wasn't too impressed by it, to be quite honest with you. But it's still a big problem on American campuses.
No, I agree with that, Joe. And it sounds like a mostly peaceful protest that you attended there. Water bottles being thrown at police and arrests. So that's mostly peaceful anyway. Joe, unfortunately these protests they have become part of the issues that we have to deal with. In this case, to me, it's interesting to watch how Hamas and Palestinian groups are garnering support and the sympathy of American youth, and how you have professors and faculty members that are all in on supporting Hamas. You have horrific anti-Semitic rhetoric being repeated in a lot of these protesters, Jewish students, and even non-Jewish students who just don't want to wear an armband are being prevented from going to parts of campuses, not going to exams. This is, one of the things I've grappled with in my work is I've come to the conclusion over the probably even before the Afghanistan withdrawal that we've lost the war on terror. And how do I know that? And what we've witnessed now is really just all the confirmation I needed. When you have American students, 30% of American, youth saying, hey, maybe Osama bin Laden was onto something about his, fatwa against the U.S., or maybe 9/11 wasn't a horrific thing, or, seeing slogans like rape is resistance being repeated by American students and watching these protests. It's the confirmation to me that the war has come home, and not the physical element of the war, but we're losing the battle for hearts and minds for our children. And that's what's really, I've been grappling with this for a couple of years, but these last several weeks have really driven home the point. And it's something, I probably said it earlier. I seem to be saying this a lot, to far more than I ever should, but I thought I'd live to see the day where, people are chanting death to America and, death to Israel, and Israeli students are, being treated almost like the precursors of Kristallnacht, and the media doesn't blink, and the president really doesn't have anything to say about it. But he mentions, Islamophobia in the same breath as anti-Semitism, when I'm not watching Islamophobic protests break out. I start to question is this the country I grew up in? Anyway, I guess that's my my therapy session for today. Thanks for sharing it with me, Joe. But if you have any parting thoughts on that,
you're absolutely right. And the worst part of all of this is that these people are saying, are chanting death to Israel and death to America. They're American students. That's what is the tough part, right? So, and something that strikes me as well, I just want to add that, I've seen a lot of these, pro-Hamas protests and pro-Mukawama or pro-resistance protests in the Middle East. And these protests, not all of them, but a good chunk of them are copy paste of these protests I see in the Middle East. It's like they transplanted them from the Middle East to, Middle America, or these, or Portland State or wherever. Just the words that they're saying, it's crazy.
It's almost like there's a handbook out there. And groups financing it. But no, I don't think so. It's just organic, right, John?
Yeah. It's crazy. I'm telling you, these words, the words that I've heard in the West Bank, that are pro Hamas. I'm hearing them on these, on these campus protests. It's crazy. So anyway, something is definitely, there's something, someone is, or some group is definitely organizing this behind the scenes. Absolutely 100% sure of it. So this is a problem. Now, next time, what is it going to be, right? What if there's a war between the United States and China? God forbid. What are we going to see on the campuses now, right?
So, where were these protesters when the Syrian regime and the Assad regime was killing hundreds of thousands of Syrians?
Right.
Where were these protests when the Chinese, and they're currently still doing it, rounding up Muslim Uyghurs and putting them in essentially re-education camps, dare I say concentration camps, millions, silent on all of these issues, but Israel legitimately responds to attack, and these campuses are shut down. There might actually be an agenda out there from certain groups, and they may very well be organized and ready for this. Look, we've seen reporting that there are groups out there that are funding these, that are providing, and that these protests were organized back in 2023. And, what really bothers me is that we're just watching the press whitewash all of this.
Yeah.
A lot of things bother me these days. And I guess that maybe that's the smallest of it, but they wouldn't get away with, these protest groups wouldn't get away with this if the press would actually shine some sunlight on this. But instead, they seem content to not put videos of students being hurled anti-Semitic, having anti-Semitic insults hurled against them, or being prevented from going to class because they're not wearing the right piece of gear that will allow them to show that they swear fealty to a pro-Hamas movement. It's again, and here we are. It's quite depressing, Joe.
It is, absolutely. Unfortunately, but that's where we're at right now.
Well, we are always a ray of sunshine here at the Long War Journal, as well as a Generation Jihad. But we just have to, to speak the truth, and this is what we're experiencing. So, Joe, thanks for your time today, and thanks for your excellent analysis. Look forward to talking to you again next month.
All right, I appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone, for listening to today's episode of Generation Jihad. Just a reminder, you can listen to us on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you can listen to podcasts. Please subscribe to Generation Jihad. Leave us a review, preferably a positive one, but only if we earned it. Thanks again, and we'll see you all again real soon.